Welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast, where every other week we explore the beauty and power of faith in Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Neal. Hi, welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast. Do not adjust your sets. I am not Dr. Tom Neal, but he has allowed me to graciously guest host this episode. I am so happy to be here today with Father Stephen Koeth, who's a professor at the University of Notre Dame. We're going to be discussing mostly the research that he did for his dissertation, which is now available in a book form, and the book is called Crabgrass Catholicism. I was fortunate to meet Father Koeth just a couple months ago, right before the book came out. He did a presentation on it, and then I said, I've got to order this thing. So I've been reading it and studying it, and I want to ask you, Father, if you might introduce yourself just a little bit about where you're from, and if you could give me sort of the elevator pitch of the book. What is the book about? How did you wind up on this topic?
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for inviting me. I grew up on Staten Island, New York, and came to the University of Notre Dame as an undergraduate, and then joined the Holy Cross Fathers when I graduated from the university. And while I was doing doctoral studies at Columbia University back home in New York, looking for a dissertation topic, interested in religion and cities, and eminent scholars in urban studies and in religion noted that nobody had really looked at Catholics and suburbs since Andrew Greeley, Father Andrew Greeley, the sociologist, did in 1959. So it had been a long time. And here I was, a couple miles from the kind of classic American suburb of Levittown on Long Island. Yeah. And so I just thought it was a perfect opportunity to study a little bit of how I grew up even on Staten Island and mix my interests in urban studies and in religion and available sources nearby in New York. So that's how I came to the topic. And the elevator pitch, the kind of summary of the book is just the ways that post-war suburbanization from the 1940s through the 1960s changed American Catholicism, changed definitions of parish and community and understandings of those things, changed the relationship between the clergy and the laity, kind of shifting some of that power dynamic towards the laity a little bit more, how it changed Catholic education, putting real stresses on the building of schools and the ability to educate as many Catholic children as possible in Catholic schools, how it changed Catholic politics, maybe kind of shifting things from a kind of urban union and industrial focus to a taxpayer, homeowner, a suburban political focus. So each of the chapters kind of breaks down some of these principal changes that I see suburbanization having brought to the church in the U.S.
Yeah, excellent. I was telling Derek, our producer, before we were setting up, I said the book's sort of a theory of everything if you really think about it, because it involves so many different dynamics about particularly in everything about America anyways, right? Because it involves race and politics and culture, but also parish, education, clergy, laity. So if you're an interested, even religious person, I don't even think you need to be Catholic for this book to really kind of open your eyes to a lot of things, but especially for Catholics, I think it's so helpful of seeing kind of how we've gotten to where we are. Sort of where we came from is understanding where we came from is a big part of that. But then for me, it's really, caused me to ask a lot of questions about where might we be going in the future, or at least to be aware of the kinds of things that have shaped our past and that we need to sort of negotiate and wrestle with as we move forward. So maybe if we could start by looking, as you do in the book, you give us sort of a description of urban centers of Catholicism in sort of the late 19th century, early 20th century, and what that looked like. How does that framework lay out what we're going to see the in a particular way in Rockville Center, the Diocese of Rockville Center? They try and replicate with the move to the suburbs, but what does it look like in the urban center? What did Catholicism look like? Easy question.
Yeah, from the mid-1800s on, American Catholicism became an urban religion because of mass migration from Europe. The Irish and the Germans first, and the Italians and the Poles, et cetera, later. And those immigrants, of course, are coming in large part for jobs, right? They're coming for economic improvement and religious freedom. And so they stay in the urban centers, which are rapidly industrializing. But they also stay in the urban centers because they're able to find people who look and sound and talk and pray like they do. They can find those ethnic communities and parishes in the United States. The Church of the United States at this time not only becomes urban, but it also becomes ethnic. The church is organized by those ethnic communities. And so here's the Irish parish, here's the Polish, here's the German. And they sustain those immigrants, protect them from anti-Catholicism, allow them to keep their traditions and their cultures, their faith for a while, even their languages. But it also at the same time allows them to assimilate from a position of strength. They ultimately all do become American. They all do speak English eventually, right? But they do it from a position that they have this community that's a source of strength. But in a lot of ways, those urban Catholic parishes are worlds unto themselves. They have not only their own church, but their own school. It's not just an hour on Sunday and the kids every day for school. It's also novenas in the evening and sodality meetings and Holy Name Society. And so the social life and the worship life revolve around the parish. Even the occupational life, often one got one's job because father had a connection at the plant because he already knew the foreman or whatever. So it really was the world in whole for these parishioners. It took up a full city block physically. It contained the church and the rectory and the convent and the school and the playground. Parishes often gave to those neighborhoods in cities their name. People would say, well, I'm from Southville, I'm from St. Anne's. And people use that name. Again, a whole world. Pick it up and move to the suburbs. The attempt is to plant a parish physically in the same way, school, rectory, convent, church, but it's not the same because you're not walking past it 5 times a day on the way to the store and the subway and to work. You're driving. There are sidewalks even, so you're not interacting with parishioners as frequently on the street. You're not interacting with clergy and religious on the street. The names of the parishes don't give their names to sections of suburbs. You go by the name of the suburb, right? And of course, the ethnicity falls away too, right? By then, these Catholic immigrants and their children and grandchildren really have become American, right? So now a parish has a mix of Irish, Polish, Italian, and German. And the names of those parishes reflect that. They go from Our Lady of Mount Carmel or St. Patrick to Our Lady of Grace or Holy Spirit Parish, a little bit more kind of generic,
Yeah.
And then but then finally, the community and that definition of parish and the way that it sustains not just religious life, but social life and even occupational life, maybe. Again, it kind of atrophies to the sense of it only sustains the religious life because people's social life is elsewhere. People are in the family home. They're watching television in the living room. They're involved in other societies, not at the parish, the Kiwanis Club or the Elks or whatever else. So as much as there's this attempt to pick it up and move it, there was maybe a lack of recognition that the suburbs were different enough that old model wasn't going to work. And how could the church respond to this new reality?
That's really great summary. So one of the things I just want to emphasize, I didn't even realize this. I heard you speak about the book and then reading it, that it was just sort of the classic idea of a parish was not just a place to worship, but also a school, frequently a convent, a gymnasium, like you said, an entire city block. All of these structures that now I think, if you ask someone, does your parish have a school? Does it have a gymnasium? Does it have a convent? Whose parish has a convent today, right? It's a rare thing, but that was the default way of thinking about what a parish even looked like physically. Yes. But that cultural role that it played, I think it's hard for us to imagine what that was like, that this is a place that you always are. You play basketball for not the elementary school you went to, but for your parish. You're on whatever, the St. Patrick's basketball team or football team or whatever. And that defines your social life in such a very sort of a thick way. And today it's, as you said, one of the places we kind of dip in and out of, maybe for just one purpose, if we're even going there at all. And so we're really imagining not just a historically older kind of experience, like, oh, well, that happened a long time ago, but it was a different kind of place. And just the physical structure, the outlay of the place, of a neighborhood. You go from an urban center where there's small buildings, apartments. People are packed in. They're close to each other. They're walking mostly. That is just a completely different area. I recently moved to Pensacola just a little over a year ago. And I haven't had to move a lot of times in my life, but one of the hilarious features on Zillow as you're looking at homes is walkability scores, and everything's like a 1. Nothing's walkable, anywhere I've ever looked, and it's hard for me to imagine where could you have a walkable place? Yeah. I've never lived in a city, right? I'm used to driving past trees to get anywhere. There's a whole bunch of trees, and then you get to your next thing. So that physical environment in its totality impacts the way that a parish is going to function. And so you have the normal sense of what a parish was, and now we're building suburbs. Well, we'll just do the same thing. But we find out quickly that it doesn't work. One thread I want to kind of pull on a little bit, you talked about the ethnic suburbs, the ethnic parishes in the urban center functioning to hold language, tradition, culture, meals, even, I'm sure, music. When the move happens to the suburbs, it's not merely that those immigrants are moving out, but it's that they're not really seeing themselves as immigrants anymore. You made a really interesting remark in one of the chapters about how there were clearly Italian styles of worship and piety and culture that were different than Irish culture and piety and traditions. But by the time Catholics moved to the suburbs, it seemed like, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically Catholic piety became pretty much Irish piety in large respect. In that Sunday Mass obligation became, really, really important. And saint festivals or festas kind of died off in some respects. So could you talk a little bit about that sort of merging of identity from individual immigrant groups to just a Catholic group? Because that's a really significant change.
Yeah, and that process certainly began in the city because it began, as you are indicating, in the change from the actual immigrant generation to then the generation of their children and then the generation of their grandchildren. But within the confines of the urban ethnic parish, even as it moved from immigrant to children to grandchildren, it was still able to maintain itself a little bit better because the parish was still very much an Italian parish, and it had those traditions, it had those practices. When the move to the suburb, I would say, is the kind of the final nail in the coffin of there is this sense of, no, we're leaving that old world behind. We're excited to move to a new world, so to speak, and to become American, right? We've just finished the war. The war is yet another proof that Catholics are good Americans, right? And we're fighting in foxholes with Jews and Protestants on equal footing, and we're all Americans together. And so there was an excitement around that. There would have been maybe even a desire on some of these children and grandchildren's parts to not do that old-fashioned stuff. We don't want to look old world. We don't want to look too ethnic. We don't want to look too. We're American. We're modern. And so yes, some of those festas kind of fall away. Some of the foreign language certainly falls away. They're not learning Italian the way that they had in previous generation. And yes, you say they become Irish, and that's how scholars often refer to it, in part because the Irish were the largest group of Catholic first, and then other ethnic groups follow. The Irish have a little bit of a leg up because their own language had been beaten out of them even back home, so they already speak English. Yes, their form of piety, their attachment to Catholic education, Catholic schools. When Italians first arrive, they don't have that same attachment. They develop it by the 1960s in the suburbs. Italian Catholics are going, and their children are going to Catholic schools at almost similar rates to Irish Catholics. So yeah, that does evolve over time, but what it means in a lot of ways is that ethnicity and culture are less and less a vehicle for the passing on of faith. The culture that gets taken on is, yes, a kind of an Irish Catholic culture in terms of prayer, in terms of piety. but it's also just an American culture, as you said. I kind of have a theory of everything on some level, right? Because I'm talking about suburbanization. I'm talking about it as a move physically from one place to another, and space matters, and we can talk more about that. But so too do the things that go along with this move. The higher levels of educational attainment. Catholics are going to college at higher rates than ever before, which means they're getting better jobs and making more money than ever before, which means that they're filling their suburban homes with more things. And so you have consumer culture and material culture, let alone entertainment, the hi-fi stereo and the TV. This is all to say that, and then you mentioned too, gender and race and all these other things that are affected by this move. It's not just about the move from one physical space to another.
Yeah.
It's all of these things together that ends up making the culture less Catholic, more generically American. Catholics look less different than they do from their Jewish and Protestant neighbors. And that makes it harder to pass on the faith, because the faith had been passed on through culture, through language and tradition and music and dance and food. And as you say, thick layers of passing on the faith. And then it becomes maybe a little bit thinner. The faith is passed on through CCD, 1 hour a week.
Right.
And is that enough?
Yeah. Let's talk about education specifically. This is one of the things that really kind of caught my attention about your argument. And maybe if you could just, briefly narrate sort of some of the construction statistics with the move to Long Island. I remember it was like a mountain of data about numbers. You're a humanities person too, but she's so great with handling all these numbers. They don't stick in my mind. Could you sort of give us a sense of the construction, particularly of schools, and maybe if you got it, at hand in your mind, the numbers of students as we move into particularly the Diocese of Rockville Center, which is sort of the center of most of the research in the book?
Yeah, I focus my research on the Diocese of Rockville Center, which covers the 2 suburban counties east of New York City. So Long Island is 4 counties. Brooklyn and Queens are on the west end of the island, but they're 2 of the 5 boroughs of New York City, so they're urban. And then Nassau and Suffolk County are the 2 eastern counties of Long Island. They're suburban. The whole island, all 4 counties, had been overseen by the Diocese of Brooklyn until 1957. And in 1957, the Vatican establishes the Diocese of Rockville Center to cover the church in Nassau and Suffolk, recognizing that the church in the suburbs was booming. Right? Why was it booming? 1945, the war ends. All these soldiers need homes. The GI Bill, et cetera, et cetera. 1947, Levittown opens. Right, so the beginning of the building of mass post-war suburbanization of suburban.
I want to interject one comment about Levittown. Please. I had never heard of it till I heard your presentation and read the book, and I watched a half of some old PBS documentary about Levittown with people that live there that are still the documentary was filmed in the 90s. It was people that had lived there for however many 40, 50 years. Some of them described like that the final decision for them was, if we get one of these houses, it's going to come with a TV nicer than what we could buy on our own. And that the TV went underneath the staircase so that it wouldn't take up room. But a lot of them moved in before the TVs were ready because there was a delay in the shipment or something. So they had this weird hole in the stairway. And they remember when the trucks came with the TVs. And also the arrangement of the streets was alphabetically by last name of the owners. So there's some woman saying, we're on the, Fox Street or something. Like there's 3 Foxes in a row, and 2 of them, the man, because all the properties in the male's name, I guess, had the same name. So it was like, John Fox, 2 John Foxes in a row. And I guess a common problem was coming home late at night from a Christmas party or something where you had maybe a few too many cocktails and going into the wrong house and getting pretty fair into going to your room before you realize you're in the wrong house because they were so similar. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah, they were cooking, and we have to also point out one of the other reasons why you said the television set and the appliances that we couldn't get this anywhere else. They couldn't afford housing that was any cheaper anywhere else. It was to the point with the GI Bill and with FHA loans that it was cheaper to buy a Levittown house than it was to rent an apartment in New York City for a lot of these veterans.
Interesting,
and of course, more space.
Too. you note in the book, like, there's very fascinating commentary within Catholic periodicals at the time about the dangers of the city. Like, this is this grimy, crime-filled, sort of sinful place where there's all these temptations and there's not enough room for your family to spread out. And so you go to the suburbs, and then hilariously, these Levittown homes are like 2 bedrooms or whatever, maybe room for 3 people. So there's not really room for a big family in these Levittown houses either, which I thought was just a hysterical sort of thing, that you got to get out of this city. It's not enough room for your family. Go build one of these homes. And then if you did, you still didn't have enough room really to have a lot of kids. Maybe it's cleaner, better air quality or something. But I thought that was fascinating. The way that Catholic commentary pushed people out to the suburbs, right? And then in some places rejoiced, in some places was, critiquing, like, the way the suburbs were ruining everything and we got to go back to the city. So Catholics seem to not be able to make up their minds about whether a city was a good place or the suburbs, or whether we're just unhappy wherever we are. I thought that was very fascinating.
Yeah, and actually, Catholics aren't alone in this. We don't have to go into in great deal, but there's a landmark essay by an urban historian called "How Hell Moved from the City to the Suburbs," and the idea was that Catholics weren't the only people who said, "Oh, the city is so bad. It is crime-ridden. It leads to vice. It leads to." And all of a sudden, the suburbs start booming in the 1940s and 50s, and then the problem is the suburbs. And one of the arguments, I think, that is to be made along these lines is actually that the criticism in both instances is really by elites about working class and middle class Jews and Catholics.
Wow.
Because they were the people to blame for the crime and the whatever else in the slums of the city, the ghettos. Yeah. And then it's 1945 and on that Catholics and Jews are able to suburbanize at higher rates finally, because they are able to attain the education, attain the loans, et cetera, et cetera. And now the commentary at that point is the suburbs are ready-made slums. They're all cookie cutter. They're built cheaply. They're going to degrade quickly. But it's also a commentary or criticism of the people who are going to be living there, is that, these people are going to bring this same problem with them. I think there's an argument to be made that that's part of what's going on there.
Let's get back. We were trying to get into education, and I derailed us. So let's think about the building of schools in Long Island, and just that urgency of like, we've got to build a school. I know that there's a story you tell in the book, and you told it at Notre Dame when I heard you, about a pastor who spends his first night in the rectory. Finish this story.
Yeah, it's Our Lady of Grace Parish in West Babylon, and Father Leonard is the newly assigned pastor. There's land, but there's no buildings, so they have a suburban ranch house that has been purchased as the temporary rectory. And he is staying there the first night, and he reports this later, that a woman knocks on the front door of this rectory and says, "Father, when are you going to build a school?" I mean, it's literally the first question that gets asked, right? And so I've already given you a little bit of the background of the establishment of the diocese. So the key year is 1945, the war ends. 1957, the Diocese of Rockville Center gets established. So just between those years, the war finally ends. We can start to build schools. We can start to build parishes. There are 28 parishes founded on Long Island between 45 and 57. 19 of those parishes establish a grade school. It's a pretty high percentage. After 1957, the Diocese of Rockville Center founds 21 parishes in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. One of those 21 parishes establishes a grade school.
Now, this is fascinating. I want to make sure that the people listening get this. That what's the timeline after 57? As Correct. Early as 1957, the Correct. Diocese said maybe we should slow down on the construction of schools. Correct. I think that's completely fascinating, because it's so early that you would think this was the high time. Everything was great. This is, the 50s. We couldn't be stopped with our success in passing on the faith and building schools. But the diocese was already, so this means they already saw, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should kind of pause here. It is several years before Vatican II. Fascinating. So there's a couple. It is, and I think part of this is one of the things that I think that my book brings to the conversation in American Catholic history, because the presumption is what you've said. This is the golden era. We're building left, right, and center. Everything is on the rise. Everything is great.
And this is not to say everything was terrible, but it is to say the golden era wasn't so golden. Even then, there were these troubles, there were these problems, challenges. So a couple of things going on to keep a diocese like this from necessarily building parishes. One, of course, is the cost, right? And costs are rising at this time because the type of equipment that you even need in schools is increasing. You need video equipment and science lab equipment in a way that you didn't in a previous era. So too, faculty is changing. It had been overwhelmingly religious nuns. And even before the council, and even before the number of women entering the convent declines by the beginning in the early 60s, even in the late 50s, there's not enough nuns. A bishop would go to a mother superior and say, "Sister, we know you're 12 sisters over at this school, but we're about to establish a new school. We need 12 more over here." And mother superior said, "I don't have them to give you," right? So that means you're hiring lay people, which means you're paying them, which means you got to charge tuition or higher tuition. So all of these factors are at play. By the late 50s and the early 60s, some of the baby boom peak is turning down. And so maybe some of the need is down. But let me give you some more numbers just to kind of make a final point about a change in ideas around how the faith should be passed on, right? In 1963, St. Cyril and Methodius Parish, Deer Park, Long Island, their parish school had 1,000 students in their grade school. Now that's sizable Catholic grade school, right? If I do my math correctly, we're talking approximately 3 classes on a grade level of 40 students each. Now think about your own parish grade schools. They only have 1 or 2 classes. There's 28 kids or 30 kids in a classroom. This is a huge Catholic school. But those 1,000 parishioner children in that school, there were 6,200 parish children in the CCD program. So even with a huge parish school, you weren't going to be able to educate even a fifth of the kids that you were baptizing and
in the background, right, is the bishops at the Council of Baltimore that every Catholic student should be educated in a Catholic school. This is, in the 1800s. And, Diocese has really set out trying to respond to that. But I guess what we see clearly by 57 is even when you have the support of parents that want to donate their money and they want to build and we get the land, you can't build something big enough to really fit everybody in. Hundreds, thousands of students on a waiting list at a place that has a school, and 1,000 students in an elementary school is no small feat. I mean, that's a major operation. I've just been reading about the history of my parish. We just celebrated 80 years just last weekend, when the date that we're recording this, and there was 5 nuns educating something like 300 students. I don't really know how they did that. 8 grades, 8 grade levels, only 5 teachers, and there was 360 students or something like that at its peak. The nuns were being paid $50 a month, and then they were being given, a place to live, utilities, all that for, the parish covered that. And then their salary was $50 a month. Well, it got to the point where they had to hire some lay teachers, and they had to pay them $150 a month, which I imagine wasn't some huge salary, right? But it was triple the rate of what they could get the sisters for. And point. So that kind of shows you, if you got to make a little bit of a change, even if you're not paying the lay people very much money, it's going to be quite a bit more expensive. And as you said, even in the 50s, there wasn't enough religious to just cheaply staff all of these things. So we did this thing. I guess the Church in America succeeded in this way of getting people thirsty for the idea of Catholic education. But because there were so many religious for a while, they didn't have to understand the financial impact of what it would mean. And I guess we were benefiting from this, all of the religious that could do this. And when that begins to change, the parents just can't keep up with it, with the cost.
No, that's absolutely right. I think on every level. Andrew Greeley, again, I mentioned him before, crucially important in this study because he does so much research, statistical research, sociological research around parishes and Catholic education in particular. And he says, there's no doubt, American Catholic parents, even through the 1960s and 70s, as American Catholics begin disagreeing about everything, right? They disagree about Vietnam, they disagree about abortion, they disagree about women's ordination. The thing they agree about, Catholic education, universal support for Catholic education. And yet, again, push comes to shove, can you afford it? Can you build enough buildings? Can you hire enough teachers? Uh, then you have the issue, again, things I haven't mentioned yet, but to throw them in. All these suburban in the 50s and 60s, all these suburbs are building their own public schools for the first time. They're establishing fire departments and police departments. So suburban tax rates are skyrocketing. So you're paying a mortgage and you're paying suburban tax rates. You also have the money as a lay Catholic to pay the tuition for a Catholic school, even if you really want it for your kids. Are there enough desks in the school? And do you have enough money for it? And then, of course, the suburban schools become so good. And that's a whole other issue then in later years, in the 70s, 80s, and then going forward, suburban public schools are so good that many parents say, well, why would I not take this opportunity for free?
So there was one school or parish you mentioned in the book, I don't remember the name of it, that they built a school, but they decided not to open it as a school, right? So the original plan was, we're going to build a school, we get the money, they raise the money very fast, and then they construct it, but the pastor says, we need to use this sort of for a CCD program and not for a school because, well, it's not enough room on the one hand, and staffing it's more expensive than when we started raising the money because of, all the things that are changing. And the pastor decides we're not going to use it as a school. And that's a controversial decision at the time. So let me ask you, from your research, is the shift from schools to either, after school education? I think there was some system at least in New York, of taking the Catholic students out of their classes in the public school and allowing them time for formation. Was that on campus at their public school, or did they just bus them to the parish?
In some instances, it began as such, and then lawsuits ended up kind of making that impossible.
So there's time release programs. That's what they were called, right?
Correct.
So there's a time release program, and then there's the CCD development, and then some schools being used for CCD. What does the research show about the effectiveness of a Catholic school, which has its limits? You can't get everybody in there; it's expensive and whatever. Yep. Compared to sort of the in parish CCD models. I know you discussed some CCD programs happening in homes, hundreds of homes with all kinds of things. So what's sort of the research about the effectiveness? There's all the data about the difficulty of maintaining the schools, but which is more effective?
Yeah, so real quickly, the CCD programs and release time programs existed even in the city, because even in the city in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, we didn't have enough desks in Catholic schools to educate every Catholic kid. So they did pre-exist. But these numbers become so overwhelming in the suburbs, 6,000 kids in CCD, only 1,000 in the grade school, right? So it's a sea change. And at the time, there are people who argue that this is actually better. No, don't go to the Catholic grade school. Send your kids to public school. We should integrate. We should become Americans. We should, and we can use that money that we're not spending on building the building and hiring the teachers. We can put that towards other forms of faith formation, and it will be in the home, and it will be in families, and it'll be liturgically focused, and it's going to be better. Mary Perkins Ryan writes a famous book in 1964, "Are Parochial Schools the Answer?" And she very decidedly comes down, no. But to answer your question now directly, all the statistics that Andrew Greeley finds and others find, there is no better way of predicting adult practice of the faith or lifelong practice of the faith than participation in Catholic education as a youth. That was true in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Recent statistics indicate that that's less true, that there is not as much of an advantage, but for an awfully long time, it was a significant indicator of likelihood of adult participation in the faith if one had gone to Catholic education at some point during their educational years. And Andrew really goes into great length about why this might be. And I think that we can kind of go back to an earlier part of our conversation to answer some of it, right? To say the thickness of Catholicism in a 5-day-a-week program where there might be a nun in front of the classroom or at least down the hall, where you're going to mass 1 day a week, when you're saying a prayer before every class, there's a statue or a crucifix in the room, there's religion every day of the week, not just 1 day of the week after school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's just so much more opportunities for that thickness that then can perdure into adulthood. in a way that's a little bit more difficult. If the phrase that's used is if you're getting your religion in vitamin form, right? Take a pill, this little bit. And the person who uses that phrase is actually Father Leonard, who was the pastor of
Okay.
Our Lady of Grace Parish in West Babylon, who
Yeah.
had that woman knock on his front door, when are you building the school? And that was the parish and that was the school that got built as a 12 classroom.
Oh, this was the parish. Okay.
This
I
was the
didn't
very
remember that was the
parish.
same.
And they actually built a 24 room, $1.5 million school building in 1966. And he, with the approval of the bishop, decide we built this building, but we're not going to open it as a Catholic school. We're going to open it as a catechetical center, because how would I decide which kids are going to be able to be admitted to the school and which are not? We couldn't fit them all. So let's use this building in a different way. It's all part of this era. But we have to say, at least the data would indicate that meant that less children were likely to participate in the faith later, because their formation was not as robust as it could have been.
Let me ask you about a couple of other things before we run out of time. One of the chapters you talk about politics in the suburbs, and you mentioned earlier sort of this change from the union-focused sort of blue-collar Catholic bloc in the urban centers to the mortgage-paying person worried about their tax rates. I think you said in the book that there's like almost effectively a 60% tax rate in Long Island because they're building the entire infrastructure and it was just killing people. So it changed Catholics' minds about what's important. What are the problems that are really facing them? So just, briefly, how does the move to the suburbs kind of begin to fracture this notion of like a Catholic political identity? Because I was really just very interested in the impact that has, even from a utilitarian perspective. If you're a politician trying to get votes, the suburbs change that. So, can you comment on some of the things that are active there?
Yeah, one of the things that I use to focus this conversation in the book is a debate in 1967 in New York State about a new state constitution. And the previous constitution of New York State had what was called a Blaine Amendment. Many states around the country have it, which forbid the use of state funding for non-public schools, for private education. And the bishops had pushed against Blaine amendments for years. The bishops wanted to be able to get state funding for Catholic schools. And finally, the draft constitution, the new draft constitution, 1967, eliminates the Blaine Amendment. And New York State would have been allowed to give money to yeshivas, to Catholic schools, to non-public grade schools. This draft constitution goes up before the people of New York State. And even in highly Catholic sections of Long Island, it is defeated roundly, right?
Yes.
And I use it as a way of saying, see, these Catholic voters are voting as suburban voters. They're voting as homeowners and mortgage payers and suburban taxpayers. They're concerned about their pocketbook. They support Catholic education. All the polls show that they still do at this time in 67 strongly. Many of them have their kids in Catholic schools. Well, why wouldn't they want? Now, some of them might have a principled objection. Some might say, oh, this is church and state. I'm actually against this. But an awful lot of them were more concerned about the fact that if the state is not only funding public schools, it's also helping fund Catholic private schools and Jewish private schools, et cetera. Guess what's going to go up even further is your tax rate, because the state needs that much more money. And so again, as I said earlier, because their situation changes, both locationally, socioeconomically, et cetera, their self-interest is different, and so they vote differently. And at this time, in the late 50s into the late 60s, politicians on the national level and the local level of both parties are recognizing this change and trying to position themselves, right? Catholics had largely been pretty lock, stock, and barrel Democratic voters, right? Union Democrats, right? Machine politicians in these urban centers in Chicago and New York, right? Democratic politicians. By Eisenhower and then certainly by Nixon, there's this openness on American Catholics' part to vote for Republicans. Certainly anti-communism in the Cold War is part of that, but so too is the move to the suburbs, and so too is the concern about tax rates and revolt against high tax rates. And so it's not that Catholics then become conservative voters or become lock, stock, and barrel Republican voters. It's that they become suburban swing voters.
Yeah, I
Right?
think
They become
the
the
way
classic swing voters.
I'm not great at politics in any way. My colleagues will back me up on this 100%. As I was reading, I thought, well, okay, they're moving from party or platform to sort of like issues.
Yeah.
What's sort of the current issue that really is going to be where you've got to make the argument to get them. Wow, there's so many things here, so many more things we could say. I'd like to close if we can go back to what really to me is like the fundamental question. I think you provide so many answers about how things happened, but it's raised for me this question, which I know probably know what I'm going to ask you. I asked you at Notre Dame, but if we see that this is how, in the urban centers, the parish was the center of everything. It was a center for your language, your music, your culture, your festivals, your food. It was where you did everything, is where you knew everyone, as you said, even where you might find your job. Then we, moved to the suburbs, and I mean, it just doesn't hold, right? Because everything is different. The tax rates are different. The politics are different. The built physical environment just makes a lot of that untenable. Ideas are changing too about what a family is. These migrants don't feel like migrants anymore or immigrants anymore. They feel American. You said in your presentation that the church never got the question of the suburbs right. We never figured out what the suburbs meant or what a parish could mean for the suburbs. So I want to ask you, just explore. And I don't expect you to have a concrete, definitive answer, but we're in a certainly maybe a post-suburban era now where we're going to whatever people call exurbs. We're in a different era than the 60s or 70s now. So other things have changed. So what can we do practically to strengthen the identity of a parish? I think it's foolish to imagine we're going to go back and capture that urban sort of solution of we'll just make the parish the center of your entire life. I think that's not realistic. What do you think from all of the research that you did and all of the examples you've seen? What are some ways that we can maybe build or strengthen parish identities now, learning lessons from the wide range of stories that you saw and wrote about in this book?
Yeah, well, two things. Like I said to you at Notre Dame, one, if I had that answer, I'd be a rich man, right? And two, I'm an historian, so we got a little bit queasy when we start to talk about predicting the future as opposed to looking at the past. But let me say that I think my answer actually might go slightly against something you just said. I think actually maybe the strength of the future and the potential of the future is an attempt to recapture at least some of the elements of the older parish. And what I mean by that is this. I think, we're actually in a moment different today than when I first started this research, right, 10 years ago, where the number of people entering the church in the United States has rebounded significantly in the last several years. And we're kind of, what's that about? Where's that coming from, right? And we don't know for sure, do we? But we have theories. And I think one of the ones that's most convincing to me is that, especially in a highly polarized era and a highly fractured era with social media, and we're all kind of these isolated bubbles, right? There's this quest for community. There's this desire for connection. There's a desire for meaning, something beyond me as the arbiter of truth and as the arbiter of meaning, right? And I think that is why Catholicism would be somewhat attractive, because it's mainly young people, who are making who are making up these numbers of people converting to Catholicism. I think that is attractive to the traditions of the church, the community of the church, the depth, the moral meaning, the worldview. I think increasingly is attractive, and we know how to have those things and pass those things on, because parishes have been doing it and had done it for an awfully long time. So no, it probably doesn't look like the sodalities of the 1930s, and it probably doesn't look like the Holy Name Society. We're probably not going to be able to rebuild Catholic education to what it was in the 1940s. But at the same time, I think we do understand how to form connection. And how to value the person, right? And how to form intimacy in community, from faith sharing and Bible study, and retreat groups and young adult groups, et cetera, et cetera. I think that parishes that provide these types of settings for people to make those personal connections, I think that's where the future is going to be. Whether it's suburban or it's urban or ex-urban or whatever else.
Right.
I think in a lot of ways we're distilling the definition of the parish, to focus on that community rooted in Christ, rooted in the scriptures, and then in the sacraments. That's actually attractive enough.
That's beautiful. Oh man, Father, thank you so much for the work that you put into this research, and for sitting down with us today. Maybe we can find a way to get you out here at some point, because I think so many people need to hear this story, but also to be inspired to think about creatively, like how do we go forward, as a church. And thank you for digging me a little bit out of my pessimism there, because I can get overwhelmed by problems and go, well, whatever, someday we'll be in eternity and then we won't have to worry about problems. But I think maybe there's more optimism there than I realize. Certainly,
let's hope so.
That quest for community, I think, is very real. And if we can just find ways to lean into that. I guess one thing that you see is it's almost as though trying to come up with a solution, maybe that's not like the way to do it, but just be with people, because it almost seems like it has to happen organically, and a program and a plan's never going to get that organic community and that growth that we need. So, well, thank you again for being with us. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a blessing, and we'll let you go.
Absolutely. Almighty God, we ask your blessing upon all of the listeners of this podcast and all of the members of the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee and their wonderful Bishop Bach. We pray this all through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son,
Amen.
and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much.
God bless you all. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Sharing the Faith podcast. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit ptdiocese.org/sharingthefaith. If you listen to the audio version through an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe, or leave a comment on the episode. Thank you for listening.